Hi there, I thought I'd record a video. For one reason, because I haven't recorded one for a long time, in case anyone was kind of waiting or interested in one. I'm from here. And the other because I thought it was worthwhile to do something of this game, which is by a Polish publisher, so there's not so much coverage on this in English language, so for English language users. It's by publisher Untitled Chapter. That's interesting, something about a museum. This, I think, is the Polish resistance, the flag of the Polish resistance. It's used on the back of some counters, such as these ones, which represent the underground resistance in the in Warsaw. So yeah, I've just finished a game of it. It comes with two scenarios. One's this called Second Tank Army. So it's the attack of the Russian Second Tank Army, which essentially starts here. Warsaw is over here, and there's three sort of objectives here, here, and here. No, sorry, those two there. So Wolumin and Radzimin up there. So each hex is, I believe, a kilometre, and the ultimate objective is Warsaw itself. If that is captured, no, sorry, in this scenario, if Prague and Grodno, so two like suburbs on this side of the Wisla River, are captured by the Russians, they win an automatic victory. Otherwise, they have these three other victory points, and they can get a sliding scale of victory points based on when they capture those. Each turn is 8 hours, and this scenario is 5 days long. So potentially 15 turns. Every third turn is a night turn where you get like half movement and potentially you have to roll die if you roll in combat, and potentially you take a step loss or a strength point loss, or both sides take a strength point loss, or you get a subtraction to your attack. So it's risky, but sometimes you have to do it because you know, as the Russians, you're trying to gain ground as quick as you are. So the Germans start with a smattering of forces. So let me see if I can show you. I'll just give you a quick idea of the situation, then go into talk about the system itself for a bit. So these are the strength point sheet. So it's a roster. So every unit. So for example, here you have the German. That's the 5th Tank Division, 5th SS Tank Division, and every unit in it from the headquarters, which is that, to artillery. You've got flak units, engineers, then these are, I think, anti-tank, and then tank divisions and so forth, reconnaissance. They all have strength points, and then a number of boxes, but I'll get into that in a minute. So essentially the Germans, they have an ad hoc, a defence made out of these 4 divisions. So some from 2 divisions are on the board at the start, a few round here, and some back here. So and then they get more, some coming in from here and some coming in from here. Essentially this and this edge are... No, sorry, I think it's just this edge is the Russian supply supply source, and so that edge and that edge are the German supply sources, which tells you, the Soviets is just from the south. So the Soviets are essentially, they own the land down here. They're trying to push up and to take Warsaw, or in this scenario, just to capture the skirting villages, preparation for the push on Warsaw. And the Germans essentially have got whisking forces in from here and here, and then reserves. So I guess these are retreating from other Soviet armies because some Soviet units come on here as well. But so the Germans have the ad hoc, so they never get all of those divisions, they just get bits and bobs of them. And the Soviets, on the other hand, they have the 3rd Panzer Army, 8th or Corps, 8th Panzer, 16th Panzer. So all of these are on. And then the 2nd Panzer Army assets. So these are various like engineers and anti-tank. Then these are anti-tank, anti-AA and recon units. And then they also get some of these. So these are from the 47th Infantry Army. So these are all motorised. These ones are not motorised except for their engineer units. And these ones come on later. So it's all spearheaded by, of course, the more mobile, the army, the mechanised armies or corps. I'm not exactly sure because it's all in Russian and I haven't managed to translate all of it. So it's a very interesting situation because you have this sort of ad hoc spotty defence that gets stronger. You have a very strong initial attacker trying to push as far as they can. I decided in my game I wouldn't bother about Warsaw because there's some interesting rules for the Warsaw uprising to occur at a certain point when certain things happen. I didn't want to get into that. I was just learning the game, so I thought we'd just try for these outlying towns and or villages. And I must say that I have really enjoyed it up to the point where I am. I called it on the 12th turn because the Russians obviously could not make their objectives to gain enough victory points. There's taken out, say, 35, probably double that on counting losses from the Germans on a final count, but the Germans were standing on 99 victory points, essentially for having held this for much longer than I should have let them as the Russians. So, obviously I'd do things differently the next time I played. But you can see the map is, I actually really like it. It's a computer graphic map, and normally I hate those, but these, you can see the graphics of the trees. They seem to be taken from real trees, so they have some sort of a realistic effect to them, and it's very nicely done. I think it's an excellent map. I really like it. You see the shading around the river and the streams, so they stand out. You've got swamps, and then you have these main roads, secondary roads. You have railways, like the Germans have a couple of tank railway, armoured railway units. And and so so the map's really great, and then the units are really great. I really like the way it's so detailed in that you can see you've got all these different types of units. So essentially, for this Panzer, I guess it's the equivalent of division, but I think that's a corps, isn't it? For the Russians, you have the headquarters, then you have the tanks, and then the infantry, tanks, infantry, tanks, infantry. So that's the sort of core of it. 3 tanks and the infantry supports, and all the infantry, these in this case being motorised. Then you have these 2, which are anti-tank, like tank destroyer units. Then you get an extra motorised infantry division, a very strong one. And then you get the engineers, you get another motorised something or other, I can't remember. Then you get, I think that might be the reconnaissance, and then you get anti-AA artillery and etc. and just general artillery. In fact, the rack of the rocket artillery. So each of them is detailed in detail like that. So for example, here we have the 16th. And you can see there's the headquarters. Here's the rocket artillery. Then they have anti-aircraft, because there is air in this. It's very abstracted. In this scenario, only the Germans have 1 unit. So essentially, you're using your AA just to protect your headquarters and other units within like 2 hex range. And then the 16th there there's the engineers. There's that special extra strong motorised unit. let me open this up to show you some more. Okay, and then, so there you got the 164 tank, and then there's the 164 infantry component. So those normally travel stacked. Then you've got the short range artillery, so it's motorized mortar battalion or whatever it is. Here's some more rockets. I showed those before, didn't I? Here's a field artillery motorized. You can see a little truck. So it's beautifully detailed. And then in this, it's wonderfully considered in the sense that, let me see if I can show you. Yeah, like here. So he's got 6 boxes, but he starts with 5 strength. So he doesn't just lose 1 strength every box. So some of them, so at a certain point he's going to keep, although he's going to lose a strength point in battle, he's going to be keeping his effectiveness. Whereas, for example, the artillery, they're very strong but brittle, so they lose strength very quickly. And there's lots of finesse in the rules. So, for instance, the artillery can take a loss, and then in retreat they always take an extra loss and things like that. So to account for differences and so many sort of extra finesses. Not too complicated. It's not for a sort of a seasoned grognard. It's nothing that you can't get the handle of very quickly. You've got things like you'll see, if I can look without the glare, let's zoom in. You'll see the stars on these tank units. That's armour bonus. So they get that unless they're fighting in forests or towns. And then they also get yellow armour bonuses, which are flamethrower units. So even some infantry units have that. And so you can still use that in cities and forests. And then the tank units also get these numbers, which indicate they have ranged fire. So you actually get, it's a bit strange, because although you're sort of operating battalions and regiments, you actually get a kind of a tactical component in that as you are moving, you can fire at range at 2 hexes maximum, and then when you're close up, you can still get all those units with range fire can still, that you have an armour component and a gun component, and you compare those and make a simple die roll. So essentially, you can move and get to fire twice before you then go to the combat phase. So you move at long range, fire at long range, fire at short range, and then have a standard combat, which is odds based with who else you are. But what it means is that if you do have armoured units with range fire, they can sort of whittle the defender down before you even get to them, which is a nice little twist. It adds more, and so it makes it a slow playing game. What with things like that, and then having to always check, okay, so which units I've got, these 3 units from where are they from, and especially with the Germans, because one's you often stacked one from here, maybe one from here, and you have to find them, check their strength and that. So it slows everything down. But I don't know, despite the kind of the sort of a bit fiddliness and a bit sort of fussiness of this, it gives such a it gives you a real sense of what you're doing, because you have all these different units with each one with different capabilities, even if just slightly, and even if just in the way that their brittleness or not is modelled. It gives you a real sense of of the battle. And then I think but the main thing which gives me a real sense of that is the attritional nature of it, because essentially when you go into combat, on the combat table you're just going to get A1 or B1, which is either attack or retreat or defend or retreat, or up to 3 hexes, even 4 hexes. I never got to that. So in the combat, which is odds based, you get those retreats results. So that's after any ranged fire you might have when you're adjacent. And then you go to the losses. So then each side checks their strength and each side rolls. So both sides could take a loss. And you can see most units are sort of 5-6 strength at most. So on average, they're not going to cause a loss. It's only when you add in extra units, or if you have a bonus, like if you were a 5 strength tank unit and you rolled a 7, you're causing no loss, even though you might have caused your opponent to retreat up here. You actually don't cause him any loss unless, say, you got 3 stars and he doesn't have any to sort of to alter the net gain. Then you shift 3 rows on this, and now you're causing a loss. So it's really great because you get a result almost every combat. There's not many no retreats. It does happen, especially at 1-to-1. There's sit on a roll at 2d6 of 6, 7, or 8. So the most commonest rolls there will be no effect, but you will still get a loss, and both sides might get lost, or you might find yourself retreating. Yet you deliver some lucky shot or something for significant damage to the enemy, and they don't deliver any to you. So, and the most losses, you can see the combat losses go all the way up to whopping 6s and 7s, but I never got there because you would have to have huge stacks and then 3 or 4 of them to get anywhere near this. So I was getting 2 losses at most. I probably got up to about here and here, but I never rolled those extreme rolls. So you can see it's very attritional, and so instead of me sort of having a thin line of Germans and then one of them just disappearing and the Russians swooping through, they were gradually pushed back, getting weaker and weaker, and then eventually the Russians could be strong enough to push right through, and then they met the kind of some more Germans flooding in. But all of that, it gave me this great feeling of the attritional warfare, the sort of the slog and the push, and then you can gather your artillery. So some units have our artillery, and then they have range, like this one's range 5, these ones range 3, some even range 6. Normally artillery, it depends on the artillery strength, how much strength points that is, and then your artillery strength, and then the target strength. So the greater the strength of the targets, the more massed in the hex, the more damage you can do as artillery. So you have that, and then you also have another thing. If you get 11 or more artillery points firing all together, you get what's called a barrage, so you can go up even higher. Otherwise artillery are more or less firing singly. And the barrage happens before movement and combat, so you can barrage your enemy, blast them up. Then you can there's also a phase in movement where you spend some movement points and have a combat in movement. Then there's also counter-attack in movement where the enemy can move 1 hex, and so and then kind of weaken your attack. So you move, then they get a chance to move 1 hex as long as they get into a zone of control, and then you can see how if they had some in reserves, you had a big stack move up ready to hit a smaller stack, they can suddenly send some in and then soak off some of that attack. I didn't use that so much because it was just getting a little bit too fiddly for me. I think I used it once, but the threat of it was there. Plus, in this situation, the Germans didn't really have enough units to sort of hold in reserves. They always had like a crumbling front line, and then were struggling to get a second and third line of defence up behind that. But it would create for very interesting situations if you had 2 sort of mass divisions facing each other, and some in reserves either side, so each side trying to look for penetration and filling holes and so forth. So I think it would give really interesting decisions in relation to that. So I really like the system, and I really enjoyed the game, although it was a bit fiddly and it was time consuming. So I kind of, that was enough for me, and I don't feel that I want to dive straight in and play the whole campaign. Although, because I've had this taster, the whole campaign involves all those units at some point that you saw on my sheet. So, you've got tons of each line of those as a separate counter. So you've got tons of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 German divisions against a whole panzer army and infantry army with extra assets on board. And then that scenario is 1, 2, 3, 4. That scenario begins, so the uprising scenario they call it, which is really where you're going to be getting into Warsaw. And these are all that's the reinforcement schedule. No, sorry, that's the setup. And then you have a reinforcement schedule here. That scenario starts where this one ends off. So, yeah, so you can or you can join them together. So you could play this one first and then play the next one. So I would be interested in doing that, because I'd like to try this again and get a better result for the Russians. Now I know the system more, and I know sort of what you have to do to, mass your artillery and do a real spearhead. It's quite difficult because I was scared as the Russians for my flanks, because you have the black ones are SS, so you've got the 5th SS and the 3rd SS. They have some very strong units, 6 and 5. So that's tank and infantry. So that's 11 strength versus the comparative ones on the Russian side would be 9 strength. So well, at that point the Russians were already sort of whittled down a bit when they started coming in. So, and they could come in on the Russian flank. So. I think you can detect my enthusiasm for the game, but then I have to point out that the rules are a mess. It's ridiculous. It's these are translated from the Polish. Unfortunately, in a sense, you do get all the Polish components in it. So these are all the rules in Polish, and here's the scenario book in Polish. And thanks to the wonder of Google Translate, you can use your camera just to look at that rule book and then translate it in real time for yourself from Polish to whichever language you prefer. And I needed to do that because these rules the English rules are just carelessly done. It has to be said they obviously didn't. He just sort of wanted to buy into the English market and botched this together without. I don't know if he used Google Translate or what. So. And he obviously translated and got bored and couldn't be bothered to go back and check everything and check, or didn't, maybe it wasn't within his ability, fair enough, but he didn't want to pay someone to do it. So be warned. There's the point is that there's direct contradictions, and that there's different use of terms for the same thing. So I guess maybe he translated differently, or his Google Translate translated it one way in this paragraph, and then a different way, the same thing a different way in another paragraph. You know how it is. So, and then there's even things like, you can see here, this isn't the only one, there's several, 3 or 4, 5 or 6 sections that are actually still in Polish. They're just okay, so this is the English rule book, that's in Polish, thank you. So I had to go around and translate from the Polish to check things, to understand things. It took a lot of preparation to get this up to usability. Fortunately, you don't need all of this rule book because there's things, it's a series rule book, so there's things for boats and other units, airborne and sort of stuff that we don't need. But you do have to prepare it first, or be willing, or be prepared to spend a lot of breaks in your game to figure out what is actually meant, and maybe make a few house rulings of yourself. There's one thing that's completely impractical. I talked about it's called fire at range, FAR, so that you can the tank units essentially can fire at 2 hexes and then 1 hex range before you actually get to combat. In the rules, there's a sort of complicated chart, and I passed it all and made it out. It took several drafts before I could get it. You have these 4 phases. So that's the move phase, attack from move, which sort of is a function of movement. Then you have the counter-attack move. He calls it counter-attack, but it's actually just the movement for counter-attack. So it's really a move rather than attack. And then you have the combat phase. And so and every turn you have, each side has those. So essentially there's 4 of those and twice a turn, so that's 8 of those. But the rules say you can only fire at range 4 times a turn. And so it says, if you do it here, you either have the choice. You can either do it in move or in a counter-attack move. So essentially, you either do it during your move or in your opponent's turn when you try to counter-attack. Or, stuff like that. I can't remember the exact details of it now, even though I worked it all out here. But the point being, there's 8 chances you can get to fire, but you're only allowed to do it 4 times. And how the hell do you record that? And you can see how many tank units you have. How you can? There's nothing in the checks. You do get a lot of markers, and these are all my own backing, because these were just cardboard, thin cardboard that I had to glue these to. Otherwise, you couldn't pick them up with tweezers. Well, you could, but really difficultly. You've got mines, so the engineers units can lay mines or take up mines. Tank barriers never got round to building those. Did lots of entrenchments on behalf of the Germans. Then you got building bridges and out of supply markers. But yeah, what was I saying? Yeah, so you can fire 4 times. There's no markers to say, okay, I'm on my second fire, I've got 2 more. How are you going to track it? And even if you did have those markers, a nightmare. Can you imagine, each tank unit, maybe you've got 2 in a stack, and one's got 2 fired twice, the other's 3 times. It's ridiculous. So I just said, sod it. And plus, on top of that, each of those opportunities, so you get 4 opportunities. Field artillery could do it once. Panzerfaust, have some Panzerfaust units could do it once. And again, the Panzerfaust, it's kind of like an interesting extra. So you get these units and you just add them. They can actually move independently. All they can do is they get 1 shot at range on the fence, and it's really weak. And this is the firing at range table. So you compare the gun strength and Panzerfaust, it's 1 versus the armour difference. Armour's always nearly 2 or 3. So they're always going to be at a -3 generally. So only on a 2, on a 2d6, do they have any effect. So they're they're in there for flavour, and it kind of adds to it, and it doesn't give it a bit of that ASL kind of thing. It like bung it in the kitchen sink, and it's great because I feel like I've used my Panzerfaust, but it's a waste of time. But anyway, all that saying, so anti-tanks can do it 1 per strength point, and armour do it depending on the strength points, this number of times each opportunity. Sod it. I just said every chance you get, you can fire once, everyone. Do you know what I mean? It's really nice, and I think this is a lot of the thought that has gone into it of how it all works, and it works well, etc. This is my optional rule. That's it. That's what we use, because that's just too much. It's just too fiddly, and it completely impractical in recording. So but yeah, and so and it took a long time to work out what that meant in the rules, because the rules flatly contradict themselves, and just again, you've got like you've got rules references, and that's the rules reference to the Polish version, because the English version, he's formatted it differently and put it in some different orders, so the numbers of each section don't correlate. So 13 is night in the English rules, but it's not in the Polish rules. So when you have a rules reference, this hasn't been he didn't convert that over from Polish, and again, there's another bit that's all in Polish. And then you have confusing things like, he calls this easy and easy, which is interior zone and exterior zone. And it's just kind of like, well, that's 2 hex range, that's 1 hex range. It's just, I don't know, making it a bit needlessly complicated and confusing, because it's not even, it's not. And again, in the Polish, it's DSO and BSO. Then he converts it to just 2 hexes and 1 hex. That's what it is. Oh dear. So it took a bit of passing, and I had to work a fair bit, but I can enjoy that, even though I sort of grumble every game, because every game they give you your player age sheet, and it needs so much more work to give everything. All of that up there, I just summarised essential things like supply, stacking, zone of control, how artillery works, attack from move, and fire at range. There, I did it. It all fits. You could make it slightly bigger, maybe do 2 sheets. But there's gaps. Do you know what I mean? There's all that gap there. There's a whole side there. That is essential. Otherwise, you're always flicking through the rules looking for those sections. Stupid idiots. I don't know why. I think designers, they love the research and then get fiddling everything out, working out, okay, this is how I'm going to represent everything, and then they have to write the rules, and that's kind of okay, and then it gets to the bit where you have to present it to the customer, and I think they're like, sod it, I can't be bothered, it's all in there, here you go, I'll print out a nice looking terrain effects chart, the rest is up to you. But even so, so this took a little bit more than some games of preparation, but despite, and as I was getting into it, I was thinking, because I looked at it before, and I played 2 or 3 turns some years ago, and I just kind of, threw my hands up as aspiration, but I guess because with this, the whole kerfuffle on at the moment, we've got, I at least have more time to spare stuck at home, so I was able to give this time it otherwise wouldn't have been able to deserve. But so I think in summary, I'd just like to say that I think what you've got here is a very interesting system, and it's got a lot of kind of a feel of veracity to its situation and the units involved and their capabilities vis-a-vis each other, but it's badly presented, unfortunately let down by its English rules translation. So if you're willing to kind of put in some tinkering effort, and I kind of find it a bit like comparative to what you have miniatures gamers, they have to do a lot of preparation. They have to paint all their figures and build the terrain and that before they actually get to the battles. For them, that is the biggest part of the hobby, and I think the battles are actually, just the sort of the icing on the cake, as it were. To see, they want to. They're heading. That's the goal, to see them all on the tabletop. But the bulk of their hobby is the preparation. So, and I don't mind a bit of preparation. I actually enjoy that. My goal is to get here, and this is not the cream of cake. This is the meat. But if I have to sort of peel all the potatoes first, I don't mind it. It makes the meal even more worth it in the end if I've put extra effort into it. So yeah, that's all I can say. Is a shame they can't afford, I guess, a proper. I think all you really need is one dedicated person who is thorough and is not afraid to call a spade, and you could have a really nicely done rule book. I would do it for like $100, even though the hours it would take me to do it would be worth a lot more than that, but apparently that doesn't even fly in the wargaming world. I'm not quite sure why. Anyway, so here's a look at the battles of 1942 to 45, otherwise known as B35 for some reason. I think it should be 43 to 45. But anyway, they're known as B35, this rule set, and this is the Warszawa 1944 game.